For more, Olivia Siong once again joins us live from the forum. So, Ollie, tell us more about the discussions that the participants have been having on the Chinese economy.
That's right. We heard from the Chinese Premier, as you mentioned, they're expressing confidence in China's economic trajectory, also warning all sides not to turn trade into a security or political issue. Even though he didn't mention it, we know that the context in which this event is taking place under those sweeping global tariffs by the U.S. Trump administration. And earlier, I spoke to Eswar Prasad, who is professor at Cornell University, and he told me how all this industrial policy, coupled with the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, is adding to the uncertainty in the global economy for the long term. And the narratives have been shifting greatly, and the news also, he also spoke to me about what this means for the Chinese economy.
In Washington, it's very hard to predict where policies will go. I strongly suspect that we're going to end up with U.S. tariffs being higher than they were before the Trump era, and I suspect there are going to be tariffs perhaps at a level of about 10%, plus or minus a few percentage points, on practically every major U.S. trading partner, with the possible exceptions of Canada and Mexico. And I also strongly suspect that the tariff level on imports from China is going to be significantly higher. It could end up in the range of 25 to 30%, depending on how the negotiations go. Now, that is a tariff level that is certainly quite high, but it's a tariff level that if businesses know is going to persist for a while, they can plan around it, they can work around it. And one of the reasons I think we will end up with some significant tariffs on the U.S. side is that it is turning out to be a significant source of revenue.
And that would be a fundamental shift rather than a temporary thing, regardless of the administration in power?
It looks like we are moving to a world where every country is going to put up some protectionist barriers. And it's worth keeping in mind that there is a very curious conjuncture right now. On the one hand, you have the largest economy in the world trying to block trade through the imposition of tariffs. On the other side, you have the second largest economy in the world, China. There is a huge amount of excess capacity that has accumulated in its economy, and that excess capacity continues to increase. So China needs export markets. And given China's size, this is a frightening prospect for the rest of the world. There are many commodity exporters that are, of course, happy that China is continuing to grow. But if you look at major economies like Japan, Germany, which are very reliant on exports for their own growth and are not doing that well right now, they're quite terrified about being flooded by Chinese exports. So the reality is that every country around the world is going into somewhat defensive mode. And defensive mode essentially means putting up their own barriers to trade. So they would like freer trade with the U.S., but they're concerned about freeing up trade with China. So they're really caught in an uncomfortable situation, and unfortunately, what this portends, I think, is greater barriers to trade around the world.
What does that mean for the Chinese economy? What is your assessment of the effectiveness of these stimulus measures at this point in time?
They certainly seem to have worked despite all the uncertainty created by tariffs and the geopolitical environment. On the surface, the Chinese economy seems to be in pretty decent shape. I think Chinese leaders and also Chinese people in general seem to have accepted that the very high growth rates of the past are not going to come back. But I think the real concern about China is the deeper problems are not being addressed. The housing market continues to unravel. The financial system still has a lot of weaknesses. Not anything that will precipitate a crisis, but the financial system is not doing a great job at allocating capital. I spoke about investment doing well. It's not private investment that's growing. It's state-led investment that is growing a lot, and it's not clear that is very efficient. Local governments are under stress. So if you put these deeper problems together, it suggests that China is going to have a difficult time even maintaining 5% growth. But one might argue that what President Xi Jinping and his cabinet are doing is saving the stimulus because there might be further trouble down the road, either from external sources or from domestic sources. But I certainly wish the Chinese government would use this opportunity of relative calm to start tackling the more fundamental problems that are affecting the Chinese economy.
What is the message that businesses or investors want to hear?
What I think is needed is really much more fiscal support, not just in in the form of temporary transfers or income support, but a reorientation of the tax system so that local governments are not under so much pressure, and also you can start seeing reductions in income taxes applied to both corporations as well as households. I think those are the sorts of measures that are really necessary in order to get the economy going. But the fundamental issue really is one of confidence still, and that's why I think monetary policy won't have great traction, because when households are not very confident about future economic prospects, when private businesses are not sure about how the government is going to view them, then households don't consume, private businesses don't invest. And fixing that confidence problem with a broader set of reforms that I think are necessary on the labor market front, on the fiscal front, measures to tackle the housing market in a more fundamental way, that I think is really necessary. But all of that needs to be layered with a clear signal from the government that it is going to support private enterprise rather than be hostile towards it. It's good that President Xi Jinping had a meeting with major entrepreneurs. That has helped to turn around sentiment a little bit, but I think more concrete actions will be needed.